Hello, my friend. It's great to have you here with me in this special moment. Today, I want to talk to you about something that can change the way you see the challenges of life. I want to remind you how God uses the most difficult moments to prepare us for victories that go far beyond what we can imagine. Maybe you are going through a complicated phase. You might be dealing with losses, criticism, or even that feeling that God has forgotten you. I know this can be heavy, but I want to tell you something that is an unshakable truth. God never abandons His chosen ones. Sometimes the silence of God can seem frightening. We pray, seek answers, and it seems like nothing happens. But it is in that silence that He is acting. God does not work in a hurry. He works with purpose. Just as gold needs to go through fire to be purified, God uses struggles and challenges to shape us, strengthen us, and prepare us for something much greater. What you are living today is not the end of your story, but the beginning of something grand. God is like a craftsman who takes care of every detail. He does not waste any tear, any prayer, or any moment of pain. Everything you are facing right now is being used to prepare you for something extraordinary. It may be hard to see this in the midst of the struggle, but trust, God is in control. And if you are here now, listening to this message, know that this is not a coincidence. God wants to remind you that every difficulty has a purpose. He is building something in you that the world will still witness. Before we continue, I want to ask you something important. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. After all, those who understand the process never doubt the outcome. God is preparing something incredible for you, and I want you to be ready to live it. Now let's reflect together on how God transforms challenges into victories, and how He never abandons those He has chosen. Shall we continue? The silence of God is something that often leaves us restless. When we face difficulties, our first reaction is to seek answers, cry out for help, and hope that God acts immediately. But when everything seems to remain the same, when our prayers seem unheard, it is easy to think that God is distant or that He has forgotten us. However, the truth is very different. God is never absent. He is always present, even when we cannot perceive Him. The silence of God is not a sign of abandonment, but of preparation. Think of a seed. Before it blooms, it needs to be buried in the ground, where no one can see it. In the dark, it undergoes a transformation process. At first, it seems that nothing is happening, but in reality, the seed is taking root, strengthening itself, and preparing to grow. The same is true for the silence of God in our lives. He is preparing us, shaping us, and strengthening us so that we can live the purpose He has planned. God does not work hastily or impulsively. He is a God of details, who takes care of every aspect of our lives with perfection. Often we want quick answers, but God knows that what we really need is a process. He does not give us something before the right time, because He knows that without being prepared, we will not be able to sustain what He has for us. Think of Joseph in the Bible. He had grand dreams, but before seeing them fulfilled, he went through years of silence and suffering. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold as a slave, and unjustly imprisoned. During all that time, it seemed that God was silent, but in fact, God was working. He was shaping Joseph's character, strengthening his faith, and preparing him for the greater purpose He had for his life. When the right time came, Joseph was elevated to a position of authority in Egypt and was able to save his family and many others. The silence of God is often the moment when He is teaching us to trust in Him. It is easy to trust when everything is going well, but it is in the silence that our faith is tested and strengthened. God wants us to learn to depend on Him, even when we do not understand what is happening. He wants us to trust that He is in control, even when we cannot see what He is doing. Another powerful example is David. He was anointed king while still young, but he spent years fleeing from Saul, facing dangers, and living in caves. During that time, it seemed that God was silent. But in reality, God was preparing David to be a king after his own heart. He was teaching David to be humble, to trust in him, and to lead with wisdom. When the right time came, David took the throne and became one of the greatest kings of Israel. The silence of God also teaches us to value the process. We live in a world that values speed, where everything needs to happen immediately. But God does not work that way. He values the process because it is in the process that we are transformed. It is in the process that we learn to be patient, to trust, and to grow. If you are facing the silence of God today, I want to encourage you not to give up. Do not interpret the silence as abandonment. God is with you, even if you cannot feel Him. He is taking care of every detail of your life, shaping what is necessary for you to live the purpose He has planned. Remember that God sees the big picture. He knows what is best for you and is working for your good, even if you cannot understand it right now. Romans 8:28 reminds us that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to His purpose. This includes the silence. The silence of God is also an invitation to draw closer to Him. It is a moment to seek His presence, to delve deeper into His Word, and to strengthen our communion with Him. Often, it is in the silence that we hear God's voice more clearly. Finally, remember that the silence of God does not last forever. Just as the seed eventually blooms, God's purpose for your life will also manifest in due time. What you are facing today is just a part of the process. Trust that God is in control and that He is working for your good. Be patient, be perseverant, and keep trusting. God never abandons His chosen ones. He is with you, even in the silence. And when the right time comes, you will see that everything you faced was worth it. The silence of God is just the prelude to something grand that is to come. Remember, silence is not the end, but the beginning of something extraordinary. Trust the process, for God is taking care of every detail. He is preparing you to live the purpose He has planned. Many times, when we face a fall, we feel that everything is lost. It is natural to think this way because, in the moment of pain, it is difficult to see beyond what we are living. Falls can make us feel defeated, powerless, and even hopeless. But for God, falls are not the end. They are part of a greater process, a process that He uses to shape us, teach us, and prepare us for something much greater than we can imagine. God does not waste any experience in our lives, not even the most painful ones. He transforms each fall into a step toward victory. What seems to be the end is often just the beginning of something extraordinary. One of the most powerful examples of this in the Bible is the story of Joseph. Joseph was Jacob's beloved son, and this sparked the envy of his brothers. He had grand dreams given by God that showed he would be exalted and have a prominent position. But before seeing these dreams fulfilled, Joseph faced a series of falls that could have destroyed his faith and hope. Joseph's first fall was the betrayal by his own brothers. They threw him into a pit and then sold him as a slave to merchants who were going to Egypt. Imagine what Joseph must have felt at that moment. He was just a young man, full of dreams, and suddenly found himself betrayed by those who were supposed to protect him. For many, this would already be the end. But God was in control. In Egypt, Joseph was bought by Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh. Even as a slave, Joseph stood out for his integrity and dedication. He gained Potiphar's trust and was put in charge of his entire household. It seemed that things were getting better, but then came another fall. Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, and when he rejected her, she falsely accused him of attempting to assault her. Joseph was unjustly imprisoned. Perhaps you are facing a fall right now. You may have lost something important, been wronged, or be dealing with a situation that seems to have no way out. I want to remind you that God is in control. He is using this situation to shape you, to strengthen your faith, and to prepare you for something greater. Remember that God does not waste any experience. He transforms each fall into a step toward victory. What you are facing today is not the end of your story. Just as it happened with Joseph, God is working behind the scenes, preparing the stage for something extraordinary. Trust the process. God never abandons His chosen ones. He is with you, even in the falls, and is using every moment to lead you to the purpose He has for your life. Falls are not the end. They are just the beginning of something grand. The refining process is one of the most powerful ways that God uses to shape our character and prepare us for the purpose He has for our lives. Just as gold must go through fire to be purified, we also face challenges and trials that transform us and make us stronger. This process can be painful, but it is essential for us to become everything that God has planned. A biblical example that perfectly illustrates the refining process is the story of David. He was anointed king while still young, but he did not take the throne immediately. On the contrary, David went through years of trials, fleeing, and challenges before finally becoming the king of Israel. During this time, God was refining David's character, shaping him so that he could lead with wisdom, humility, and faith. David was just a shepherd when he was chosen by God. He was not the strongest or the most experienced, but God saw something special in him. When the prophet Samuel was sent to anoint the next king of Israel, he looked at David's older brothers, who seemed more qualified in human eyes. But God said to Samuel, "The Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." 1 Samuel 16:7. After being anointed, David returned to tending the sheep. He did not immediately go to the throne, and this is something we need to understand about God's process. Being chosen by God does not mean that everything will happen instantly. There is a time of preparation, a time of refinement, and David had to go through that. David's first major challenge was facing Goliath, the Philistine giant who terrorized the army of Israel. With courage and faith, David defeated Goliath using only a sling and a stone. This was a moment of victory, but it was also the beginning of a long process of trials. After defeating Goliath, David began to gain recognition and popularity. This sparked the jealousy of King Saul, who began to pursue him. David was forced to flee and spent years living as a fugitive, hiding in caves and facing constant threats to his life. During this time, he had several opportunities to kill Saul and take the throne by force, but he chose not to. He knew that the throne was a promise from God and that he should wait for the right time. These years of fleeing and trials were the fire that refined David's character. He learned to trust in God amidst difficulties, to be patient, and to act with integrity, even when he had reasons to retaliate. David wrote many of the Psalms during this period, expressing his trust in God and his dependence on Him. A clear example of this is found in Psalm 27:14, where David writes, "Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord." These words show the spiritual maturity that David developed during the refining process. He learned that God was in control and that God's timing is always perfect. When the moment finally came for David to take the throne, he was prepared. He was no longer just the young shepherd who had been anointed years before. He had been shaped by trials, strengthened by faith, and prepared to lead with wisdom and humility. David's refining process teaches us that God is not in a hurry. He does not give us something before we are ready to receive it. Often we want things to happen quickly, but God values the process. He knows that it is in the fire of trials that our character is shaped, that our faith is strengthened, and that we become more like Christ. Just like David, we all face periods of waiting and challenges. You may be going through a difficult time right now, feeling that you are in the fire of refinement. Perhaps you are facing losses, rejections, or situations that seem to have no solution. But I want to remind you of something important. God is in control. He is using this process to shape you, to strengthen your faith, and to prepare you for something greater. Gold, when refined, goes through extremely high temperatures. This heat removes impurities and makes the gold purer and more valuable. Similarly, the trials we face remove the impurities from our character, such as pride, impatience, and lack of faith. They make us stronger, more humble, and more dependent on God. The Apostle Peter wrote about this in 1 Peter 1:6-7. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. The refining process is not easy, but it is necessary. It prepares us for the purpose that God has for our lives. Just like David, we need to trust in God during this process, knowing that He is in control and that everything we face has a purpose. If you are in the midst of the fire right now, remember that God is with you. He never abandons His chosen ones. Trust the process, for God is shaping you for something grand. Just like David, you will see that the fire of refinement is not the end, but the path to the greater purpose that God has for your life. Hope is one of the greatest gifts that God gives us to face the storms of life. It is like an anchor that keeps us steady, even when the winds blow hard and the waves seem to want to knock us down. Hope is not based on what we see or feel at the moment, but on what we believe and know to be true. That God is in control and that He has a greater purpose for our lives. In Job 19:25, he declares, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last He will stand upon the earth." This is one of the most powerful declarations of hope in the Bible. Job did not understand why he was suffering, but he knew that God was in control and that, in the end, God would bring justice and restoration. Job's hope was not based on the circumstances around him, but on God's faithfulness. And in the end, God restored everything that Job had lost, giving him double what he had before. The story of Job teaches us that, even in the most difficult situations, we can have hope because God is faithful and never abandons us. Hope also helps us see God's purpose amid difficulties. Often when we are facing a storm, it is hard to understand why we are going through it. But hope reminds us that God has a purpose for everything we face. He uses difficulties to shape us, strengthen us, and prepare us for something greater. The Apostle Paul, who faced numerous difficulties in his life, wrote in 2 Corinthians 4:16-17, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison." Paul knew that the difficulties he faced were not in vain. He had hope that God was using it all for a greater purpose. This hope kept him steadfast, even amid persecutions, imprisonments, and dangers. Hope also gives us the strength to persevere. When we have hope, we can continue, even when it seems there is no way out. It gives us the courage to face challenges and reminds us that God is with us every step of the way. Hebrews 6:19 describes hope as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul. Just as an anchor keeps a boat stable in the midst of a storm, hope keeps us steady in God, even when everything around us is in chaos. But how can we cultivate this hope? First, we need to remember God's promises. The Bible is full of promises that give us hope, such as Romans 8:28, which says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." When we remember these promises, our hope is renewed. The glory of the return is not just about receiving back what was lost, but about experiencing something even greater and better. God does not just restore, he exalts. He uses the difficulties we face to prepare us for something extraordinary. The return he prepares is always greater than any fall, because he is a God of abundance, who does infinitely more than we ask or imagine. Ephesians 3:20. Another powerful example is the story of Joseph. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold as a slave, and unjustly imprisoned. For years it seemed that his life was going from bad to worse. But God was working behind the scenes, preparing the stage for Joseph's return. At the right time, God exalted him, placing him as governor of Egypt, the second highest position in the kingdom. Joseph was not only restored, but was also used by God to save his family and many others during a time of famine. The glory of Joseph's return was so grand that he could say to his brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive." Genesis 50:20. This is the essence of the glory of the return. God transforms evil into good, defeats into victories, and falls into steps towards something greater. The glory of the return is also a living testimony of God's power. When God acts in our lives, he does not do it just to bless us, but also so that others may see his greatness and be impacted by it. Our victory becomes a testimony that inspires faith, hope, and trust in God. Think of David. He was anointed king while still young, but he spent years fleeing from Saul, facing dangers, and living in caves. During that time, it seemed that God's plan for his life was far from being fulfilled. But at the right time, God exalted him, placing him on the throne of Israel. The glory of David's return was so grand that he became one of the greatest kings in Israel's history, known as a man after God's own heart. If you are facing difficulties now, I want to remind you that God is preparing something grand for you. The glory of the return that he has for your life will be greater than any pain or loss you have faced. God does not waste any experience. He uses every tear, every struggle, and every moment of pain to shape you, strengthen your faith, and prepare you for something extraordinary.